This is Health UnaBASHed, broadcasting live on Healthcare Now Radio. Health UnaBASHed is a conversational platform where healthcare meets innovation. We engage top industry talent and dive into the heart of health and wellness from vision to business model to bring you the latest developments in health tech to promising AI applications, policy, and ultimately impact on the public's health and well-being. I'm Greg Masters, co-host and executive producer, and am joined by the digital health aficionado himself, author, editor, global thought leader, and in his executive capacity, steward servant, Gil Bash. Together, we're on a mission to bring you the people, the ideas, and the companies that are not just talking the talk, but walking the talk. On today's menu, we are in the company of B2B thought leader, content creator, and top technology influencer, Evan Kirstel. Evan has built quite the digital footprint and following in the tech space, including 420,000 Twitter, 56,000 LinkedIn, 70,000 Instagram, and 5,000 YouTube followers. He focuses on educating and informing his audience to grow sustainable long-term businesses. B2B tech brands such as Intel, Amazon AWS, Dell, Microsoft, and others hire him to achieve massive visibility and scale through the power of social media. So, Gil, the floor is yours.
Greg, I want to thank you once again for that wonderful introduction for myself and obviously our very, very special guest today, Evan Kirstel. And Greg, you're always so gracious. I also want to remind all of our listeners to tune in to your show. It's a great show. It's a critical show, Pop Health Week. I think it's probably a critical conversation. You know, we're still really in the COVID era. We like to pretend that it doesn't exist any longer. But I also want to remind our listeners that you personally played a very critical role in California, helping city governments look at the risk rates of people with COVID and the alert system. So obviously you're an expert in terms of having a master's of public health and being in the discipline for so many years, but you've been on the front lines of health in many, many, many different ways. We've talked about it on the show before. So Greg, again, thank you for that. And as I mentioned, we have an incredible guest today. It's someone who many of you follow. I know at least 360,000 of you are following on X and many, many on LinkedIn. Evan Kirstel. And if you've gone to any medical conference of note, whether that's HIMSS or Health or wherever, you're bound to see Evan. You're bound to see Evan, his charming wife, Irma, who also has a tremendous amount of clout in our industry. And Evan, he says, Evan Kirstel, B2B tech influencer. I think that sort of like label on his X platform, his handle, shortchanges Evan. Evan is an illuminator. He's an amplifier. And in many cases, I look at one of the graphics he has up on his website, and I say to myself, the graphic has him and Seth Godin, who I know from my Fast Company days. And it has Evan sort of close by. I think Seth is like number 2 or 3 on the rate of influencers, and Evan is maybe number 5.
Holy candle to Seth. Seth is my guide and my
hey, guess what, my
hero.
friend?
So.
You're there on the top 10. You're there on the top 10, of course, and that's pretty impressive. You know, people like Seth, people like Evan, they have a keen eye for what's just around the corner. Evan has been pretty influential and critical to many health innovators who are seeking in a very cluttered, noisy category of digital health, health innovation, medical devices, and so forth. He's been pretty critical in helping people get a leg up and get noticed. And Evan, you're providing a service, obviously, to our health ecosystem. I want to thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, I mean, I know you have an engineering background. I know that you've been fascinated by how things work. But at the very dawn of what was then Twitter, you stepped in and recognized that there was a need, there was a gap in the innovation sector to secure space and voice. And you were really one of the first, and you're one of the biggest in the business today. What was the kind of illuminating idea where you said, hey, these platforms are not just tools or toys to share your pictures of your vacation, they're also conduits to explain in a very concise, then 120 character way, now a bit more, 120 character way. There are platforms to explain why what you're doing matters. What was the big insight?
Well, I heard someone say once that if Twitter, and I still call it Twitter, I know it's X, but I tweet, I call it Twitter, and that will never change for me. Uh, but someone once said that if Twitter didn't exist, someone would have to invent it or create it, because there just isn't. Of course, they're contenders now. An open platform for dialogue and engagement, a sort of a water cooler environment that is visible to all. It's just a unique space or destination. Now, it's become a bit of a horror show in some areas, in my opinion, but the concept of just an open style water cooler for all comers was such a profound idea. And again, this is the time of Facebook and the early friend finder and the early social networks. It was just so interesting that all comers could engage each other and put out ideas into the ether, and strangers would respond. That it really, despite its relatively niche, a small size at the beginning, it really was a game changer for the internet. And sadly, for good and bad, I mean, we saw the impact on the downside, but the upside, if we can focus on the goodness, has
Which I think
been
we
this.
should.
Yeah, there's been community engagement, discovery, meeting people, and finding ideas that you just wouldn't find anywhere else. And so that was so attractive because, again, if you put all the politics aside and the trolling and the downside, the dark kind of side of all these networks, including Twitter, X, there is that 1 or 2% that's pure gold, that's pure goodness. And I think the med Twitter, healthcare communities that are out there are just so valuable. And even though they're less than 1% of this 500 million monthly active users, that is just pure gold. Yeah.
I so agree with you. In 1994 or five, I wrote a piece on patients online. I had a big, sort of grant. I interviewed, tens of thousands of people with chronic conditions, in-home interviews, and the, America Online, AOL, was just coming on board then. And I saw clearly the trend of how people with a like chronic condition were bonding and creating on AOL these groups. Facebook has this today, right now, where patients have groups and they create communities. AOL was doing that obviously in the early 90s. And I think that the sense of hashtag on Twitter, on X, really allowed people to connect and bond. And I actually do think it was also critical to the concept of crowdsourcing ideas and treat. People were putting themselves out there. They were asking questions, and live time around the world, people were feeding them information. I still think, though, there's definitely chinks in the armor or perceived armor of Twitter. I think that for people who have critical needs, Twitter still serves a very valuable purpose in terms of the sense of urgency and live time. You're still very much there in a different way. You've always been posting everything from the cute, doggy video to you had some great things from Apple News today that I loved reading, and then you have sort of news that you aggregate, and you continue to do that. Do you mind sharing with us a professional secret? You're on a regular basis, you're curating content, you're sharing that content. And I watch it. I do engage it from time to time, especially when it sparks interest. What was your kind of strategy for doing something like that and continuing to do that?
Well, first of all, these things are personal obsessions. So I'm a news junkie, a tech junkie. When it comes to emerging technologies, I'm just completely absorbed and fascinated. So there's that need to satisfy my inner addiction when it comes to consuming content. But in the process, it's easy to then curate things that are of interest or relevant to me, things that I find interesting, color commentary, point of view, perspective. And so, the ABC, always be curating. And if you share stories that are interesting to you, and those have meaning and impact for others, you build immediate engagement and attention. That's how I discovered you, or John Noska, or Daniel Kraft, or all these amazing individuals and thought leaders were through discovery and interest in like-minded topics and themes, big ideas, big questions. And, some of the most interesting people I've met have been through these channels. And it's totally serendipity. I mean, you can bump into random people at events or conferences, but there's nothing like meeting a complete stranger and finding this simpatico, this empathetic kind of relationship. And that's the power of these open networks. And I think it would be such a shame if that were to disappear, because you can do things there. You can do it to some degree on LinkedIn. Places like Reddit are increasingly anonymous, so you really don't know who's posting or engaging. It's quite hard now to build those meaningful relationships on social media. So, maybe there's another network we need to jump on board once it reaches critical mass, because it's just so important, particularly during the pandemic when we were all more isolated and locked up to some degree at home or what have you. Being able to connect and engage real people, human to human style interaction was so valuable.
We met, Evan, actually. We were sharing content back and forth on Twitter then Twitter. And then, we combined the virtual relationship where you don't really know the person at all. You just know them from their curated shared content. And then finally we met at conferences. And so there was a sense of like, I know this guy, and I know what makes him tick. I know what he finds interesting. And lo and behold, there is a sense of warmth and support. I think you're spot on. I think that a lot of the communities that you and I and Greg have been part of really exist today because we kind of met virtually, and when the opportunity came to share a drink in a bar, we had a foundation of conversation. You're kind of changing your game up, and I've watched this. Historically, of course, you were sharing content of interest, things that like sparked your personal interest. And then you were supporting your clients, predominantly health innovators. I want to ask you about that in a second. And then, of course, you've become very strong on LinkedIn, and particularly with your LinkedIn Live, podcast program, where I think you're interviewing someone every few days. I see that you've got something going on. I stopped to watch because, it's Evan Kirstel, and Evan's probably going to have someone he's chatting with has something to say in terms of the innovation sector, whether it's cybersecurity or inventing some remote medical device. But I wanted just to ask you for a second. You became very, very prominent in health innovation, the health ecosystem, and you have an engineering background. Did you have a health background also, or did you just say, "Hey, I'm interested in health. I'm gonna focus in on that"?
Well, it's funny. I was one of those people who avoided healthcare, or avoided the system, avoided doctors like the plague. Never enjoyed participating in healthcare because it's scary and it can be daunting. And so, but when you reach the middle age, Gen X, you begin to think more about your personal health, and you take a bigger interest. I think that's a natural evolution. I'm not sure many 20-year-olds, maybe or some who are enlightened, think much about health and wellness these days. But you get our age, you begin to think about your mortality. So there was that effect going on. Also, my lovely wife was deeply involved in healthcare and wellness, was a patient advocate, and I started following her lead in terms of really understanding the healthcare system, navigating it, and looking at all these technologies that are impacting the industry. And as health became more tech-led, tech-dominant, there's so much convergence between all of my other interests, from Wi-Fi and networking and cloud and AI and silicon and software. Those are core building blocks for whatever's next in healthcare. And so it became much more interesting to me. and my clients, as it happens. I mean, I work for big brands. It's, secret, like Intel or T-Mobile for business, or, Hewlett Packard Enterprise. All of these companies have deep interests in the healthcare marketplace, not just selling their products and services, but creating innovative solutions. And there was a wonderful commercial, professional side to helping those clients navigate. So it all sort of came together. And knock on wood, people like you have, and so many others have such amazing stories about grit, and about survival, and about triumphing over the odds, facing personal health challenges. And that's just an amazing side of the whole equation as well.
Just dropping in, you're right on time for Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio. Today, we are in the company of B2B thought leader, content creator, and top tech influencer, Evan Kirstel. Evan has quite a digital footprint in social media, including large Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube followers. Stay tuned for the rest of the story.
You've gone into that sense of featuring voices on your LinkedIn Live programs. And that started, I think, about a year ago. You started to lean into that, or a little more than a year ago, but not much.
Yeah, that was during the pandemic, midway. It's like, okay, it's, the platforms are really good now. The quality of the audio, the video, the broadband, the cameras. Why not be a one-man, two-man, three-man person media company like you're doing? And everyone can do it if you have enough curiosity and interest in these topics. People aren't watching, CNN Business or Fox News Business in the way they are. They're going right to the source. They're going to your podcast. They're going to YouTube videos. They're engaging on social media to enlighten themselves. And so that's where the action is. That's where the audience, the eyeballs, and even the dollars are now. I probably, some of my episodes would equate to what a primetime, Fox Business viewership might look like, at least at scale.
You're dead right, because look, I still look at the New York Times, but I'm looking at my digital subscription, and what I'm finding is I'm really just looking at what I want to look at. I'm not, as I historically did as a pre-digital New York Times person, sort of like turning the pages back and forth and watching my fingers get, jet black from the ink. Now, of course, I'm really just scanning for the stories that interest me. And you're, in a way, because of your persona, Evan Kirstel stands for innovation, interesting personalities, things that you might not know about unless you turn into or connect to see what Evan's pushing out. And so it's a slice of like self-interest. And I think you're absolutely right. We've become citizen reporters. And in the area of health innovation, guess what? You're a correspondent. You're not a curator any longer. With your show, you're a visual correspondent now. Now, I wanted to ask you, I think more and more companies realize that having an Evan in their pocket is an important way, another important channel to get word out about what they're doing. And I see this in other formats taking flight now. There's other enterprises that are having virtual conferences with speakers. There's what you're doing. So I wanted to sort of get your read. When people approach you, and you don't have to talk about any particular names, when people approach you and say, Evan, could you help amplify the value of our enterprise? Could you help amplify ideas that I find are important, I want to share with society? What's the due diligence process you go for? Because your brand now is commingling with other people's brands. If something isn't right about their voice or idea or brand, it has a direct impact on your reputation. So I imagine there's some sort of consideration that you have to go through to say, yeah, I'm going to take you on as a client. I'm going to share your words.
Yeah, and I think in B2B, it's easier. I've been in the enterprise tech world for 30 years. So I'm familiar with my clients' work, whether it's a company like IBM or T-Mobile. And I know their products. I know people who use them. They're blue chip, names and startups who've been vetted by investors and VCs. I think so. I'm very comfortable doing that. I believe in my clients' work, and as an industry insider, I'm very familiar with the technology, the platforms. I think the danger area are quote unquote influencers with large social reach who are pushing, CBD products or supplements or vaping devices or God knows what else. There's a real problem with people misusing their personal audio, brand, their followers to just sell products. I don't really sell products. If you want to buy something, go to T-Mobile. But interviewing experts and getting industry insights is one thing, but that whole world of influencers increasingly pushing health-based products, health testing, and that's a pretty gray area that can get dark pretty quickly. And I'm aware of that. I avoid that stuff like the plague. But I think as society, we have big problems because it's not just buying, beauty products or perfumes. It's increasingly it's health products that are being pushed on the masses by I won't name names, but individuals and even financial products. Of course, we saw the whole crypto disaster.
I was at a conference directed toward women, and the one of the keynote speakers that day was a TikTok, Instagram influencer, and and this woman was speaking, very thoughtfully. I found it interesting. It's not what I do. I'm obviously very passionate about health and climate technology, particularly. I sort of believe healthy people, healthy planet. We can't be healthy if the planet isn't healthy. It's got to connect. But I was listening to this person, and they're talking about showcasing a handbag. Like, I went to this conference, I had all sorts of pictures, and I'm carrying this handbag, and everybody is looking at the handbag and going out and buying the handbag. And I, my impression of influence or amplification of value is so different than that platform. Though I realize it's valuable to that handbag company or the shoe company or these jeans are like, wow, that like to die for, so to speak. And I realize there's a market for that. You're appealing to a certain sort of viewer or listener or reader, and can you tell us a little bit about the people who are like, I follow you, obviously. I follow Evan Kirstel, and therefore I expect a certain type of information to come out from Evan's platforms. Who's your audience that you're bonded to?
Yeah, it's interesting. On one hand, it's very heavily media journalists, analysts, bloggers, digital practitioners, people sort of like ourselves in some way across industries. So that's a big, big component. People who are socially engaged and active in professionally mainly. And then there's, practitioners, CIOs and CTOs and developers and folks who are, building products, developing products, managing various organizations in the C-suite and beyond. And so that's but you never really know. I mean, the idea of demographics now is kind of passé. No one really knows who. It's not. We don't have demographics like television used to have around, your 25 to 35 kind of demographic. Those things don't exist when you get into the hundreds of thousands of followers. So it's a little bit of a mystery. But I think it's, you attract followers based on the kind of content you create and curate. So it's people who have, strong interest in technology and professionally have some business in this space.
So it's hard to believe we've been talking for 25 minutes. It seems like
Wow,
it goes by like this, and
it does.
like we could have done a special CNN on you, Evan, the 2 hour
Well,
episode.
I
But
have questions for you. So
no,
next
but you
steps
don't
is
have
for
that.
you to
No,
come on my show,
okay,
and
I'll happily.
we
I'd be
flip the
honored
script. But
when I'd be honored. But I wanted to ask you. You have a keen eye of seeing around corners, and you're very candid in sharing your process and your ideas. Do you mind sharing with us what you think is around the next corner that whether it's the way you will be supporting the health innovation industry or things on the horizon in health innovation, you say, this is on my radar screen right now?
Well, we've talked about wearable devices for years, and you and I are familiar with our Oura rings and our Apple watches and the various applications for health and wellness and insights and tracking. But I think we're going to see a sort of Cambrian explosion of apps and devices for those services, things that can help manage your diabetes, be a health coach, be an advisor, be an assistant, count your calories, give you support and encouragement, fueled by AI and Gen AI. So I know this is insiders. We see this all the time, but I don't think the general public or patients in general are quite prepared for the wave of super advanced technologies that are about to hit us, not just from big tech with Samsung and Apple and everything else, but from amazing startups. And those could come in the forms of digital apps. They can come in the form of cameras that, will record you if you fall in your home, aging in place, hospital at home. And all these things are really getting practical, affordable, and are starting to provide real utility. No more gimmicks and just marketing hype. So I'm really excited about the practical utility of these things now.
Yeah. I think, Evan, you're hitting on something that I so agree with you on, that I think that AI, LLMs, ChatGPT have breathed new life into the whole digital health innovation category. The concept of smart devices. Look, I want to say to all people who are listening, Evan Kirstel, visit him online, follow him, and if you need help getting your voice out and amplifying the value that you provide society, go to Evan Kirstel. You're going to find an ally and a friend. Evan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Gil.
And that, dear listeners, is the last note for today's melody. A huge thank you to our worldwide listeners for tuning in, and a tip of the hat to our special guest, B2B thought leader, content creator, and top tech influencer, Evan Kirstel. Do follow Evan's work on the web at www.evankirstel, and that's Kirstel, and on Twitter via @EvanKirstel. Health Unabashed streams live 3 times a day on Healthcare Now Radio, Monday through Friday at 10:30 a.m., 6:30 p.m., and 2:30 a.m. Eastern, and that's 7:30 a.m., 3:30 p.m., and 11:30 p.m. for you West Coasters. Stay social with Gil and me on Twitter via @Gil_Bash, and that's BASHE, and Greg Masters MPH, and that is Greg with 2 G's. And don't forget to give your tweet some zing with our hashtag #HealthUnabashed. Until we meet again, pursue your passion for better health and safer healthcare, and with no apologies. Bye now.